Hello everyone, this is John from Vulgar Kitten Studios and welcome to episode 15 of our Introduction to Web Development and PHP MVC Programming. What we're going to do today is we're actually going to finish up our MVC framework and just create a cross-site request forgery filter so that we can sort of just add some security features into our application already. And before we get started, I just want to go ahead and say, like I said, this is not the end of the series by any means. We're going to continue on with the series. We'll create like a login and registration system, and just continue like working with web development in general. But we'll do it all based on what we've built in the sexy MVC. So that's the reason that this is kind of like this is the end of the first season, I guess you could say, of Introduction to Web Development. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and just like finish it up. So the first thing that we need to do is I'm going to use the test route in order to work with this. So I'm going to go into app and go into my routes folder, and I'll open up the test route. And excuse me, I'm going to go ahead and take off the parameter in here, and in our home controller, I'll take out the parameter here, and we won't pass it in from here. So what we need to do, also let me go ahead and close this down. We'll close, we'll keep this open. We'll close this down. What we'll need is our test view. We'll need a test view first of all. So we'll open this up and we'll PHP lace view make, and we'll make that in templates front end pages test. And instead of returning the home view, we're going to return the test view. And let's go ahead and check it out. So we have our templates front end pages test. And here is where we're actually going to be working. So to test out cross-site request forgery protection, we're going to need a form. So we'll say form, and the action, we'll go ahead and just send it to itself. Indeed. Well, maybe not. We'll say, we'll make another route for that. We'll just go ahead and PHP lace and route make, and we'll make a test CSRF, or we'll just do test post like this, test post, and it's going to use the test post path, and the controller is going to be home controller, and the method we'll just do test underscore post. And so in our controllers, we'll have to make sure that we output a public function test post route, and we'll just echo, and we'll do some HTML tags. We'll do h1 with the style of AAOOO success, like that. And actually, as a matter of fact, we'll also want to put that in the italics, since that's kind of been what I've been using. So let's do success, like that. And that's what we want to see. Otherwise, we're going to see the access denied error. So what we need to do in here to work with CSRF, we're going to need a token. So the idea that we're going for is we're going to generate a token by creating a token in whatever controller method is attached to the route that's using the CSRF filter. So we'll have a service for that, and so we'll say service, and we'll call that token. And the token is going to have a generate method and we'll generate that with the name token. Okay, and we'll pass that in with the name token, and we'll give it the token value like this. And so what that's going to do is it's going to call the service. The service is going to actually generate a hidden input value called token and give it a random string that is going to be stored in a session that will be checked prior to form submission. And so in this way, if the token exists in the form, then we can submit the form and everything would be hunky-dory, a-okay. Otherwise, if the session token does not match, then we're going to throw an access denied error. And so in order to do this, first of all, we'll need to create our session class. So we'll open up our models, services, and session. And so these classes, again, the token and session classes, like I said, they're heavily influenced by PHP Academy or code courses, object-oriented programming tutorials. That's actually how I learned how to do it, so that's the reason that I'm using them in this way. So we're not going to use an initialize function, we're going to use an exists function, which is going to accept a name so we can check if a session exists, and we'll just return a ternary operator checking to see if it's set, our superglobal $_session, and we'll look for the name, and if it's there we'll return true, otherwise we'll return false. And we'll need a public static function put, so we can create a session. We'll give it a name and a value, and we'll return $_session called name with the value of value. And we'll also need a public static function get, so we can grab a session, which we'll just get it from the name. We'll return $_session with the name of name, and we'll also need a delete function so we can get rid of a session, and that'll be static function delete, and we'll give it a name, and we'll use our if self exists function. We'll check for the name. If it exists, then we'll unset our $_session name. And we can also give it some flash functionality as well. So if we want to flash messages through the session, we can say public static function flash, and we'll have a name and the string that we want to flash, which is just going to default to an empty string. We'll say if self exists the name, then we want to output that, so we'll say session is equal to self get name, and we'll need to also delete that as well, so we'll say self delete name, and we'll return the session that we stored. Otherwise, we'll just actually store that in the session, so we'll self put name string, like so, and that is our session method complete. So we'll also need a hash method, which will use the randomlib library to create secure random strings. So we'll go ahead and open up our hash function too, and we'll go ahead and use randomlib. So we'll say use randomlib, and we'll need the factory function, and or factory class, which we'll use as randomlib. It'll just be our entry point. And so we'll need a public static factory, and we won't need an initialize function, but we'll give the ability to hash passwords. So we'll pass in a password, and we'll return, and we'll use PHP's password hash function, which will pass the password, and we'll also want to pass in the algorithm. So what we would normally do here is, if we use the algorithm, we would use let's see, it would be bcrypt. I think bcrypt is a constant. But instead of that, it's actually returning an integer. So what we're going to do is we're going to cast that as an integer, and we're going to check our config to actually get that integer. And that is going to be hash algo, which I have it set to use blowfish encryption. And we'll pass that an array of parameters, which will actually, we can configure how strong we want this to be. So we'll set the cost, and depending on your hardware, how fast your server is, we can use int, and we'll cast that config get hash cost, and that will we'll default that to 10. But if you want to go any higher, then like I said, it will cost more resources. If you go any lower, then it might not be as strong. So it's just something that you're going to have to decide on whether or not your hardware can actually handle it. And so that's going to be our password functionality. So we'll also make a public static function password verify. And again, I don't want to use camel casing verify, just because I've already started using the convention of snake casing. So I'll change that to snake case method name, and we'll pass it a password and a hash. And so we'll return the password verify function from PHP, and that will be password hash, like that. And that just simply will verify a password against whatever hash that we actually have stored. So if we hash out a password using blowfish encryption, then we'll store that in the database instead of a plain text password, and just check it against that. So that's how it will work. And we'll also need a public static function make, and we'll take an input, and we'll return hash, and we'll use SHA-256 and use input. So that way we can also use SHA-256 encryption as well. So we'll also use public static function, and we'll make a verify function, which will check a stored hash against whatever the user inputs, and we'll return hash equals, and check against stored, and use the user input. And so we'll also want to make a random, so we'll make public static function random, and that will take a length, so how long we actually want the hash to be, and we'll say self factory is equal to a new random lib, and whoa, and we'll use a generator, and that is going to be equal to self factory get medium strength generator, and this is appropriate for most situations. So we'll return the generator, generate string, and we'll pass it the length. And so there's our hash and our session functions. Now all we need to do is create the token function. And in order to use a token, we are going to have a generate function. So we'll change the initialize to generate. And the generate function will take a token, which is going to be session put config get, and then whatever we named our CSRF session. And we'll give it a hash make hash random, and we'll give it 128-bit encryption, or 128-bit length. And so from there, we'll want to return our hidden input. So we'll make an input of type hidden, give it an ID of token, a name of token, and a value of token. And so that should suffice. So we'll public static function check, so we can check that token again, and we'll say token. We'll give it a token, and that token name will be config get csrf.session, and we'll check if session exists token name and token, the token that we passed in, is equal to session get token name. Then we'll say session delete, so we can get rid of the current token and generate a new one and return true. And otherwise, we just want to return false. So that is our token method right there. And so to check this, we're actually going to have to create a filter called CSRF and attach that to a route. So what we'll do is open up our command line, and we'll PHP lace filter make CSRF, and just go ahead and create that filter, and we'll open that up. And from here, we'll create a protected CSRF key, and in our main function, we'll by default return false because that's going to be the worst case scenario. And we'll say this CSRF key is equal to app service config get CSRF session. And then we can check that by checking to see if the input exists. So we'll say app service input exists. So if input exists, then we'll return app service token check, and we'll check the app service input post token. So we'll return, let's see, we'll return true by default so that we can use routes if there is no input, and we'll only do the check if input exists. So from there, we can actually go ahead and attach this to a route. So we'll open up our route. We'll go back into routes, and we really don't need that test post. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and PHP lace route delete test post, because we don't need that. We'll just attach it directly to the test method. So we'll say filters, and that is going to accept a CSRF filter. And in our home controller here, we basically have everything that we need, except we want to give some feedback if the session does succeed. So we'll say app service, or we'll say if app service input post name does not equal null, then we'll echo app service input post name, like that. And so we'll go into our view, into our test view, and we'll submit this to itself. We'll use a method of post, and we'll use the input of type text with an ID of name and a name of name, and a placeholder of enter your name. And we'll also need to echo out our token, so token, and we'll use an input of type submit, the value of submit. And so we'll see if this works. We'll go ahead and, so we have a syntax error, which is on our home controller. Doesn't look like I put in a semicolon. So let's go ahead and go back to here. And yeah, so let's go ahead and get rid of this method entirely because we don't even need it. So we'll go ahead and just reload the page. And it looks like we are not calling the correct, well, we actually need to go to the correct route. And we're calling function generate on null. Not sure what happened, but it looks like our token file did not actually make it into our container here, so we'll need to add it manually. Alright, so that should fix our problem. Alright, cool. And sorry, I paused the video to do a little bit of troubleshooting, and this is what I came up with, so let me go ahead and close down these session hash token CSRF filter, and the route, I'll leave that open, but here I'll just specify the token again, so that'll be just token, and actually I'm echoing that out, so let me go back into my model services token. Okay, make sure I'm returning that, and in the home controller I'm just going to have to control Z some of this stuff. So that's going to be our token, and let's see. It's still okay, so we need to make sure that we don't escape it. So we'll go into our view, and we'll use the unescaped version of echo And there we go. Okay, so now let me close down my debugger. If we click submit, and we have input. So let's go ahead and say hello. And so that works. Now, if we don't have the token though, and we use our CSRF, let's just go ahead and stop echoing that out. And we'll submit John. Then we'll see we get access denied. And so that's how we're going to protect against CSRF. So anyway, this video has been a little bit convoluted. I apologize about that. But in any case, we got that done. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.